Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hormone Helper podcast. I'm Coach Andrew, your hormone helper from Fit for All Fitness. I personally coach over 1,600 men and women to help better understand their hormones so they can lose weight and get their metabolism back on track. With this podcast, you're going to hear from me and my special guests about everything from metabolism to thyroid to weight loss. And we even talk a little bit of sexy time as we chat to spread more knowledge, thick like butter, on your hormones. If you're ready to learn, I'm ready to share, so let's do this. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where today's episode is going to be all about estrogen. How estrogen affects your body, what estrogen is used for, and then the biggest things, some of the symptoms and issues you might be experiencing that could be related to estrogen. So we're going to go into a lot of things: how estrogen affects your skin, how it affects your digestion, why and how it contributes to fatigue, how it, of course, contributes to weight gain, which is the big one, and then the inflammation that starts to build up around that, because estrogen kind of tackles a lot of stuff. And I want to make this podcast episode actually because of the two clients that I just recently onboarded through our Vantage program. One of them joined our Vantage program, which is amazing. We're going to be working with her for the next 16 weeks. And then the other one joined our Hormone Reboot program, both for two different things, but both of them had to do with estrogen. And it's so interesting because I really do believe that people are really focusing on, of course, their weight, obesity. They're like, hey, obesity and diabetes is kind of the new silent killer. But really, what causes obesity and a lot of some of the changes is, in fact, the hormonal shift. So really what the silent killer is estrogen. And a lot of people don't know enough about what estrogen is. They don't know how it's affecting their body. And so they don't really know the early signs and symptoms. And by the time they let it build up, they actually have a plethora of issues versus just one or two challenges that they're working on currently. So giving this live example, these two people approached me over the span of this week, and there were a couple of issues. So one of them had skin issues that have been going on since 2014. So very, very long time that these skin issues have been present. And it's just something that slowly progressed over time. It was something that started with a little bit of acne. Then it was, a couple of other things like psoriasis, random flare-ups, and the skin issues just never really went away. And like the majority of some of the things we experience physically, sometimes it's one of those things where you just go, you know what? It bugs me, but like I can cover it up. I don't have flare-ups all the time. So your brain isn't 100% focused on it because you think that you can live with it. And you know what? A lot of doctors and practitioners, a lot of skin specialists, they can tell you that you can live with it. Hey, just take this soap, just use niacin, just use this. And you're always burning and peeling and taking off layers instead of actually fixing what the issue is, which is what the heck is causing the skin to go off in the first place. Now, when you start to, of course, leave this, like this client is, and, it was just one of those things where they were in the midst of going back and forth and they weren't really getting clear answers from their doctors, and they were being passed on to specialists and working with naturopaths. It got to this point where, like, by the time you know it, like, hey, it's 2023 and I've still had this issue. But now I'm starting to feel really tired. I'm starting to have digestive issues. I don't know what's going on. And they chalked it up as being three separate things. But whenever I'm hearing these things combined, I'm looking at them like, no, this is just an issue that spread to other areas and got progressively worse. And this is why it's so important to stay on top of your metabolism, why it's so important to address issues and warning signs that you see, because that's what a symptom is. A symptom is basically a signal, a warning sign and an indicator that your body is experiencing something that's not normal, and that is your alert. So just like you would get a check engine light or a warning light on your car, there's kind of different stages of lights. Like your first one might be a yellow check engine light, like, hey, something is wrong. I'm running rough. I'm not quite sure what it is. You need to check this out. And maybe you don't notice any performance change. Maybe your car functions the same way that it did before, but you're like, this light's here. It's a little irritating, but as long as I don't focus on it or nothing bad happens, well, I guess I can just ignore it occasionally. But then what happens? Your engine light goes from yellow to red. And then it goes from red to maybe the car's harder to start. Maybe it misfires occasionally. Maybe it doesn't start at all. And then you start to experience what I call, like, you have a total shutdown, where the entire system starts breaking down because you let something progress longer than you actually should. And that's why estrogen and estrogen management is so important, because estrogen, for the ladies listening to the podcast, your estrogen will change a million times in your life. It'll change every 28 to 32 days for your cycle. It's going to change prenatal. It's going to change postnatal. It's going to change premenopausal, during menopause, postmenopause. It's going to change if you're on any medication like birth control. And all of those opportunities are opportunities where the estrogen can ramp up and get out of control. And then you start to have estrogen issues. Now, this isn't just a female thing. This can also be a male thing. So for a lot of men who have a lot of higher levels of stress, like the business people that I work with, well, cortisol also encourages estrogen growth, which means estrogen starts to grow, which means they start to have issues with weight. They start to use a lot of colognes, a lot of deodorants that are very estrogenic, and that starts contributing to the estrogen, as well as maybe they're not eating the right foods, and some of the foods are estrogenic as well, and that starts to get out of control. So there's a lot of opportunities, both male and female, for your estrogen to get out of hand, and if unmanaged, starts to develop into these issues. So I want to break down all of the issues, which is really 5 main issues that I see and why they're related to each other. So I'm going to start with your skin, because your skin is one of the first things that you're going to see. Your skin is the largest organ in your body. It encompasses literally everything. And not only does it encompass your entire body, your skin has multiple layers that are dying and regrowing at the same time. Hair, skin, and nails is all one organ. And the purpose of hair, skin, and nails is to protect the interior from bacteria, from damage, and from any type of inflammation. So your body will actually, like sweating, for example, will actually sweat to release toxins. You release toxins from your pores. You protect kind of that dermal layer to make sure that your bones, your joints, your muscles don't get damaged. So skin is a very important organ. And when we have something that happens to our skin, it's something, if it's a once in a while thing, like for example, maybe like you're swimming at a pool and you know what, they don't really clean the pool and you get athlete's foot, but you've never had athlete's foot and it goes away in like a week. Okay, you know what? That's not really a skin issue to worry about. But let's say you develop a skin issue that happens all the time. Like for example, you get like really cystic acne. You have really, really oily and deep skin. You get really congested pores. You have psoriasis. You have skin flare-ups that happen over and over again. There's a reason why they're appearing. This basically means that you're having inflammation in your skin area, and your body is trying to deal with it by converting it into acne, by forcing the oils to try and combat the stuff on your skin, or it starts to develop like psoriasis or milia or any type of fungal infection because the growth is getting out of control. This indicates that your skin organ is being shorted and that your skin is very weak. Now, outside of the skin issues, you also have the hair and the nails. Having hair that's very thin and that has very short life cycles, that starts to fall off, that doesn't regrow again. Having nails that are very brittle and break off very easy. All of that stuff contributes to weak skin. Skin that is not having either enough nutrients to create more dermal layers, or it is hormonally out of balance. And so these layers are not consistent. Because I'm sure you've come across someone who's never had acne their entire life. And you're like, your skin is beautiful. Like, and you're like, what do you use? And they're like, water, that's it. Like, I just water my face like a garden. And you're like, that's ridiculous because I use 17 products. You see, that's because their skin layers are growing at a consistent rate. Their dermal layer is free of inflammation. And Of course, having a good hygiene routine is important and, taking regular showers and stuff, but that's really a no-brainer. It's really the hormone piece. The hormones are stable, and so they're creating stable skin layers, and the cells are stable, so their membranes are really strong. So, in having a good, healthy skin layer, skin is one of the first things that your body shorts, and that's because skin is such a large organ. If your body has to prioritize something, if it has to look at your heart and say, do I get heart repair or do I get an extra layer of skin? Of course, it's going to short skin because we have tons of dermal layers of skin that are dying and regrowing. So we can short from that organ to make sure that we have enough building blocks for our heart, or enough building blocks for our thyroid, or enough building blocks for our metabolism and for our muscle. The skin is the first thing that shorts because it's so large. And the reason why it's managed by estrogen is basically estrogen, besides being your fat storage hormone and your fat usage hormone, fat is energy. And where do we store energy? Closest to the dermal layer, which is basically on the other side of skin. That's where fat likes to hang out, in between muscle and in between skin. So it's natural that you're going to have high amounts of estrogen that are floating there, providing constant energy to your skin to be able to regrow those cells. So if someone's estrogen is crazy high or really, really low, that fluctuation from high to low starts to change the way your skin reacts and grows. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times people think, well, is it high estrogen that causes the issue? Is it low estrogen that causes the issue? There is kind of a downside to being on both ends. So you want your estrogen to be stable. We want it to be in the middle. Unlike women where their hormones change that every 28 to 32 days, where the estrogen will fluctuate, it's those fluctuations which create skin inconsistencies. The same thing with stress. If someone is high in stress or they have high levels of stress, that fluctuation of cortisol creates a fluctuation of energy, and that creates a fluctuation of skin consistencies. So you might go through periods where before your cycle for women, you don't have any skin issues. And then as your cycle and your period goes through, or you start entering that premenopause or that menopausal state, you start to get huge breakouts, or your skin starts to change, or the way you sweat starts to change, or your hair becomes really thin, or it's fallen out more than it ever has before. That comes from that fluctuation. And we can actually control that. We can control the way that our estrogen operates and is created every single day to make sure that those fluctuational highs don't change. So skin gets shorted first. And in skin getting shorted first, having lesser dermal layers of skin or having skin that's weaker isn't really going to kill us. And that's why we always overlook it. And it's really frustrating to me as a coach when people say, hey, I've been talking to my doctor about skin issues for years. I've been working with a naturopath about cleaning up my skin for years, and it's just never really gone away, but we're always just fixing the way it looks on the outside. So maybe the oil always comes back, but you're always having all these products to get rid of the oil. That's not a solution. Maybe you have a lot of cystic acne, or you're having really big flare-ups and psoriasis, and as long as you use the creams and you stay out of the sun, the stuff doesn't appear again. Well, that's not a solution, because unless you're prepared to do that for the rest of your life, you're not addressing the real issue, which is why the skin stuff is happening. So you just keep on covering it up. You're putting a piece of tape over that check engine light, hoping and praying that one day it's going to turn off, and it's not. And that's one of the first things that starts to happen. So then you get the next thing, and that's your digestion. Digestion is a big player of estrogen, and that's because estrogen only has so many places to live. It lives in fat cells. It tries to live around your sex organs, so your ovaries, your testicles. And then from there, if there's not enough room in your fat or in around the area in which it's produced, then it's going to go into your gut, because that's kind of the next place to live. Think of it like a vacant apartment complex, right? If you got the space, hey, that's where we're going to live. Now, estrogen in the gut at the very beginning is not really I mean something that you're going to feel. You're not going to be like, oh, I have estrogen in my gut today. It's not something that's immediate. But digestion or estrogen that builds up in your digestion over time starts to make it harder and harder for your body to process and digest food. So the problem with that is your body will only work so hard to break down a piece of food before it gives up and it says, hey, this isn't digestible, so I got to get rid of it. If a food is not digestible and you need to get rid of it, this is where the body's going to start to attack it, because anything that we can't digest is a foreign body, and anything that's a foreign body, we need it to leave, because otherwise it's going to ferment and it's going to cause a lot of chronic gut issues. So where people start to have the experience of digestion is they start to get random trigger foods that they were able to eat before that all of a sudden they can't eat anymore. They're like, well, I never had issues with dairy a day in my life, but now all of a sudden I have random dairy issues, or I have random gluten issues, or there are certain foods that trigger and other foods that don't. And the thing is with this is the random trigger foods, it being random means that the same thing probably doesn't trigger you all the time. So depending on what level of estrogen is in your gut or how your level of stress is that day may or may not set off whether or not that food is a trigger. And so you start to develop a case of IBS, where your bowel and your digestion is irritated by something. This is really frustrating and can be really hard to pin down, because if you were to do something like a colonoscopy or an endoscopy, you may not find something physically wrong with your gut or with the digestive system, because it's hormones floating around. There's not anything wrong with the actual organs. So people who have digestive issues not only get random triggers to foods where they're like, I don't get it. Doesn't matter if it's an apple or if it's a piece of cheese, it just sets me off. But then they're also going to develop something like bloating that gets progressively worse over the day, where you wake up and miraculously your bloating's gone. And then as you start going through the day, you're like, oh man, as I keep eating more food, my bloating gets worse. Well, guess what? That's because estrogen is slowly building up in your gut. It clears out during the day, and then it slowly builds up again. Those digestive changes, these are going to be the things that you're going to spend years, not months, years either avoiding or trying to work through, because the majority of the stuff that your doctors or your practitioners can do is only related to the organ, not related to your hormonal changes. So what does that mean? If you go to a doctor, first thing that they're going to do is they're going to do an ultrasound of your gut. Okay, cool. They look in your gut and they're like, oh, I'm not seeing anything that's of any warning, because physically the stomach's going to be in right shape. There's probably not going to be an issue. So then they're going to send you, of course, to a gut specialist, and you're going to go there and they're going to do an exam. They might do a colonoscopy or an endoscopy. Colonoscopy, they go through your throat the other way. Basically the endoscopy going through the throat, colonoscopy going through the other way. And then basically what they're going to do is they're going to check both sides. They're going to check, is your gut, is the actual lining of your stomach or going down? Is there maybe ulcers or something crazy? Or is your intestinal tract, does it have anything that might be crazy? And like everything, there might be something they find, like one polyp that doesn't really matter, didn't really do anything, and they get rid of it while it's in there. And then you get left with this diagnosis of, hey, you have IBS. Your bowel is irritated and we don't know why. See, a digestive issue like this, because it's estrogen fluctuations, there might be times and periods in your life where your estrogen is stable, in which case your digestion might actually be really stable. And just like it becomes stable, there might be times where it's really wild. And day after day after day for weeks, you start to have a lot of digestive issues. See, because estrogen has nowhere else to go and it's completely unregulated, it's just going to bind to your food and it's just going to try to do its own thing. And so your stomach is going to try to get rid of it by attacking it. The attack is the bloat, the attack is the irritability, and that irritation causes inflammation, which is why we call it IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. It's just an irritation of your bowel. Now, what happens if we leave that for long enough? Okay, well, you're going to start to get fatigue. Fatigue is one of the most general symptoms that we get when people come to me for the Vantage program, the hormone reboot program. They're always like, Andrew, like, I just do not have energy. I'm tired. I'll wake up, I'm exhausted. I wish I had energy, but this fatigue has been something that's building up. And they always separate it and say that the fatigue has something to do with their work or with their lifestyle, but they don't really connect it to the skin issues that they have or the digestive issues that they have. But think about it this way. Estrogen is your energy storage hormone or your fat storage hormone. It's responsible for storing energy. If our energy fluctuation is not stable, so what I mean by that is like our estrogen is fluctuating high to low, high to low. There's always fluctuations with it all the time. That means that we're basically changing the size of our gas tank almost every single drive. And by drive, I mean day. Every single day that we operate, the amount of energy that we have access to is different. And the amount of energy that we store is different. Well, your body's not going to know, do I throttle the gas? Do I have to starve the gas today? And so the energy exchanged all the time, the body just says, you know what? I have to put you in the lowest operating state that I can because I know that I can maintain this state. And that's what chronic or consistent fatigue is. Fatigue that does not get better without rest. Fatigue that even though you might drink a coffee or you might do a workout, you still feel tired. Guess what? It's because your body is almost in like a limp mode where it's like, hey, I can only run at 10% because I know that you're guaranteed to get 10% of your energy every day because your hormones are out of control. And the fatigue is something that we always just chalk up to our style of life. Hey, my work is really busy right now. Kids have me really stressed right now. My business, I'm trying to do a lot of things, so I'm putting in a lot of hours. And really, if you're having these other things, the skin, the digestive issues, then maybe you should be like, hey, you know what? Maybe these things are connected. And 9 times out of 10, when I'm asking people, just like I asked these 2 clients that I onboarded this week, I said, hey, when did this happen? And did the fatigue come within 2 to 3 months after this? And they're like, you know what? I never considered that. But yeah, that's actually what happened. So fatigue starts to build because if estrogen is your energy storage hormone, then if we're not storing or utilizing or giving access to energy consistently, well, then of course we're going to feel tired. Of course, we're going to feel like we need recovery, even though, we sleep 6, 7, or 8 hours in a row. It doesn't matter what it is. Now, the last symptom is really weight gain. What is weight? People don't care if they gain weight. They care if they gain fat. We're talking about fat gain. Estrogen has to be stored with a fat cell. So when we're looking at weight gain or fat gain, we are basically looking at estrogen that needs a place to stay. So it enlarges a fat cell and then it stays in the fat cell. And the more fat you have, the more estrogen you have. And that means the more fat you store, which is the more estrogen you build. I talk about this a lot on the podcast. When we look at gaining weight, if we do not have enough energy to fuel our skin, and we don't have enough energy because we're struggling with our digestion and we're attacking the food instead of intaking it, and we're tired all the time because we're experiencing this fatigue, what would the body naturally do? It's going to say to itself, I need fat because fat is energy. And that's when you have weight gain appear. Weight gain that it starts off with 2 pounds a year, then it's 5 pounds a year. And then by the time you know it, over the span of 3 to 5 years, you're like, holy crap, I've gained 20 pounds. Not doing anything differently, still eating healthy, still exercising every day, still working out, still trying to move. But guess what? You're heavier than you've ever been before. That's because the body is saying to itself, you need this energy because you're tired, your digestion's a mess, and your skin is falling apart. And unless we force you to store the energy, so every time you eat, I'm going to store a little bit more, then we're not actually going to get enough energy to fix this issue. These are all of the warning signs that come, and they don't have to come in like that progressive area of skin, digestion, fatigue, and weight gain. Typically, that's kind of the process, but it could be digestion first, skin second, weight gain third, fatigue next, but they all appear together. These are all of the signals that your estrogen is fluctuating, or it's not stable, or there's an issue that's here. There's something wrong with your metabolism. And here's the problem with letting these things go. Irritation becomes inflammation. Chronic inflammation means that the body is consistently shorting nutrients from what it's needed. And this is where your thyroid is going to play the I have to help out everything game. Your thyroid being the one that kind of maintains your metabolism. It says, okay, gotta take away from testosterone today to give to estrogen. Okay, gotta take from estrogen today to try and help cortisol. And as it plays the game of trying to balance out your imbalance, it becomes very tired. It can't do its job. And then you have metabolism that slows down and shuts down. Estrogen that is not managed, that's not controlled, that's not maintained in a consistent way, is going to give you a lot of these issues. And if you go through the traditional medical system, they're going to give you a range of estrogen, and that range is from 16 years old to 75. The problem with that is if you're anywhere in between, like 95% of you are listening to this, they can't do anything for you. Because truthfully, when you look at these things, is having less dermal layers of skin going to kill you? No. Perfect. Well, there's people dying every day, so they got to work with them. Is having random foods that trigger bloating going to be something that kills you? Not immediately. So they have other people to work with. And the same thing with fatigue and weight gain. They're going to give you a few recommendations to try and get some energy up, because in terms of what you have, it's really not about trying to keep you out of the doctor's office. It's really not about preventative to prevent this from getting worse. The majority of healthcare is based off of triage. Whoever is hurting the most, whoever's in the most desperate need right now, those are the people we have to help. And so this is where I'm seeing where people are reaching out to me every single day. They're like, Andrew, it's been 2014. I've had this for 5 years. I've had this for 6 years. It's been something that's progressed over the last 2 years. Since COVID scenario. Since COVID, this wasn't an issue, but it's been out of control. And it starts off really small. The occasional flare up, the small random food trigger, maybe a week of bloating that goes away, maybe a week of fatigue that goes away. And you write it off as nothing. But there gets to a point where you have to keep looking at, hey, this thing is reoccurring. It's a reoccurring challenge. So if it's reoccurring, what is needed? What is the body shorting? And what is it that I need to change to make this happen? So now here's the thing with estrogen, okay? To manage estrogen, we do a couple of things. One, through our Vantage program, we're always managing it through food, because I know for a fact that I can control food every single day of the week. I can't control someone's work schedule. I might not be able to control their workout routine. I can control what they're getting in terms of food. So from a food perspective, we're using micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals needed to not only help reduce estrogen, but provide the building blocks for other healthy hormones to go up. So a couple of nutrients I'm going to say right now that you should really be looking at. Iron is a big one. It's why classic across the board. All females are low in iron. Yeah, because your body's taking that iron to try and fix all of these 1,000 issues that you have. Iron is a big one. Zinc is another one. Magnesium, big. Potassium, big. Those are like the main compounds for like 90% of the hormones that you have. Your testosterone, your TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone, your cortisol. If we provide all of those raw building blocks that are needed in abundance every single day, then the body's going to say to itself, well, I don't have to keep pulling from my excess energy store, which is what estrogen is. I can use the building blocks I already have, and so I don't need to store as much. Then another thing that we do is as we work to increase the other hormones naturally, we start putting foods into the diet that start taking the place of estrogen. So if we think about it like the stomach, for example, estrogen parks in your gut and it's got 30 parking spaces and 30 cars are filled. Well, there's foods that have phytoestrogens that basically have a really weak estrogen that your body doesn't use. And it will take one of those spots and it will place a cone there. Like, hey, you can't park here. And so what happens is progressively over time, estrogen learns that it can't park there and then it doesn't appear in the gut again. And this is how we deal with the digestive issues. So, what are some of those foods? Legumes are really great for this. Beans are really great for this. Nuts and seeds are really great for this. This is why having healthy fats and eating healthy fats is so important. When we have the legumes, the nuts, the seeds, the beans, and we have at least those kind of 2 servings a day, which should be about a half a cup, what we're doing is we're building up that really, really weak estrogen that won't change our hormones, and we're putting more and more cones into our stomach. So in doing that, the body gets to that point where it's like, hey, you eventually can't park here. And that's the best part because then estrogen doesn't have the flare up again. Sure, it's great that we work on getting the estrogen down now, but the other thing is then we have to prevent the estrogen from coming back. And this is where a lot of the other practitioners or even naturopaths fail, is they're always dealing with what the issue is right now, but then there's no fixing of what caused this to happen. So after you get off the protocol, guess what? Classic, another 2 months later, you develop the issue again because we didn't actually correct why the buildup was happening. So micronutrients heal the other hormones and then start to make sure that estrogen doesn't have this encouragement to keep storing. Then we have the phytoestrogenic foods, which then start to take the placeholders of where the estrogen are, and then we start to build it down. And then the third thing is strength training and activity. Because when we have more muscle, we burn more calories at rest. Burning more calories at rest means we burn more fat. And if we burn more fat, it means that we have less progressive estrogen over time. It's a clockwork system and it's sustainable, but you need to work on those 3 things. And I'll end off the podcast with this. This is the stuff I see and work with in the Vantage program all the time. Our Vantage program is 16 weeks for a reason because we work on the hormone stabilizing first, making sure that those hormones get to natural levels. Once they get to the natural levels, we start tackling digestion, removing and eliminating that estrogen and preventing it from coming back. Then at that point, things like weight loss become really easy. People start seeing that 2.2 to 3.2 pounds per week, and it's like clockwork that it comes down. And then once we do that, then of course, with the body not having inflammation, people start getting enough energy to start doing workouts more consistently, and they find that they don't have to rely on the motivation anymore. It's simple, it's consistent, it can be regular, and it doesn't take a long time. 16 weeks is all is needed for us to make that transition, and then that way you can continue to start to maintain that hormone panel. But you need to look at the estrogen. So if you're having those issues, the weight issues, skin issues, your digestion, you're having the chronic fatigue all the time, and you're trying to make changes on your own, or you've gone to your doctor and it hasn't worked, well, we have opportunities and spaces in our Vantage program right now. All throughout June and July, we're actually going to be offering 10% of the Vantage program. And basically, we're doing that to add on an additional 2 weeks. So you're going to get 10% of the entire cost of Vantage program credited to get 2 additional weeks. So that way you can spend longer making sure that those hormones are stable and making sure that you're getting on track and you're getting on point with your metabolism. It doesn't have to be hard. It's not overwhelming with the process, but you need to recognize it first. And I mean, guys and gals, like, let's be real. You need to take the tape off of that check engine light and you need to stare at it and acknowledge it for what it is. No more of this BSing. I've had this issue for 4 or 5 years on and off, or 6 months on and off. You need to take care of it because it's only going to get worse and worse. And that's why we acknowledge exactly what it is. And it's fine. Hey, look, I got a check engine light. Let's go and let's deal with it. And then when we deal with it, you can move on. Because there's nothing worse like being self-conscious or being stuck in this space, all because there's a hesitation to take the time to work on it. I promise you this, the longer you leave it, the more time it's going to take to deal with the issue, the more expensive it's going to be to fix, and then the more it's going to cost you in terms of energy, in terms of mental headspace, in terms of stress, and in terms of the way that you are confident in your own body. And that to me is straight up nonsense. Me being a straight shooter, I'm always that type of person, and so are the clients who work with us. When they're like, hey, I've made a decision, I'm taking action on it right now, and I'm going all in on it. Because if we don't do that, if we don't say to ourselves, today is the last day that I feel like this, and the first day I start to make a change, it becomes a 20-year problem. So doctors are not going to help you at this point. It's one of those things where you really have to take a look at and acknowledge the estrogen for yourself. I'll drop a link of the Vantage program in the show notes. Otherwise, you can go to www.fit4allfitness.com and just go into programs. And there's the programs that are there. It will show you what the Hormone Reboot program does, what the Vantage program is for. Maybe if you need one-on-one support, the one-on-one support is there as well, and that's phenomenal. Whichever one it is, there shows a little video of what explains the program, and then there's that call to be able to book with me so we can see if it's a good fit and then take you on those next steps. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. Coach Andrew out. See you on the next episode. Well, it seems I'm all out of info juice for today. That's all for this episode, and thank you so much for listening. Please leave a raving review for me if you've learned something good, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Now, if you're in the mood for some more great content and tools to get your hormones on track, why not check out our free Facebook group and the blog on our site? We do amazing weekly trainings in our group that me and my wife call Tea and Teachings that give good tips for anything hormones and metabolism related. It's also a great community where you get to share your goals and success with like-minded people just like you. I'll make sure to drop both the Facebook group link and the blog link in the show notes for you. Or if you're ambitious like me, the name of the group is Weight Loss and Balanced Hormones. It'll say Fit for All beside it with a picture of me. So come and join us and have more fun.